Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Hi, Lisa. How are ya? I'm good, Katie. How are you? I'm good. We've been recording some good episodes.
Yes, we have.
Everyone has so many light bulb moments for me. I don't know about you, but
It's like free therapy.
I know yesterday after recording, we said that we're like, that was a day of therapy. We're like doing
Intense
therapy in these episodes. Well, let's get right in. Today we have guest Alexis Conason. I'm doing it again.
You got it.
Dr. Alexis Conason.
There we go.
I got it. All right. Welcome, Dr. Conason. We're so welcome. We're so happy to have you. You can see we're getting to the end of our recordings. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me here.
We're so happy to have this conversation with you. But before we get started, I'd love for our listeners to know a little bit about your work.
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a group practice in New York City where we focus on treating eating disorders from a weight-inclusive lens. And I also offer courses, coaching, and I have my book, The Diet-Free Revolution, which is available wherever books are sold.
Wonderful. Well, we always start these conversations with our big question around here, which is, what is a belief that you once had that you no longer have that has impacted your life in a meaningful way?
So I would say that belief is the idea that I can and have the moral imperative to should change my body into kind of this societally determined ideal. So I spent a lot of time in my life kind of chasing that ideal and really thinking that I was failing and feeling a lot of shame that I wasn't able to achieve that kind of, state that we're all told should be so accessible to everyone. And recognizing that the problem wasn't my body, but the problem was, those messages that I was getting was really transformational for me. It changed my whole life, I think, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I can relate. I think we can both relate to that. And I wanted to dig into the side of the professional side of that because I can, say the same thing. I spent years dieting. I was a part of the fitness industry. I created a weight loss program with suggested food, even though I had no nutrition training. I, did before and after pictures. I had a wellness program where I had people come in and weigh in and do different body circumference measurements, all of those things. And then when I came into the knowing, and I had my own personal experience with hating my body. And when I came into the knowing that this is what my body just is, and I don't have the control over it that I think I do, and there's really no need to try to control it anyway, I could no longer practice. I'm a physical therapist, and I was a health coach. So now I do anti-diet health, movement, and body image coaching. So it changed everything for me professionally. And I proudly say that I practice from a size or weight inclusive perspective. And I would love to hear about how your transition impacted your work and this whole idea of weight and size inclusivity and what it even means for people who have no knowledge, because some people have the privilege of never even thinking about what weight or size inclusive means in a medical or, mental health setting.
Yeah, so I'll start with what it means to me. In my opinion, weight inclusivity is about a more holistic vision of health, where we're not just determining health based on, someone's, weight or body size, but we're looking at health as an overall sense of physical and mental well-being. So looking at, I'm not a doctor, but from a medical perspective, looking at tests that actually tell you how your body is doing. And then if your body's not doing well, looking at things that would actually solve those issues instead of just prescribing weight loss for everything. And, also from a mental health perspective, looking at, mental health and wellness as a big piece of the health picture, and also recognizing the impact that weight loss focusing intentionally on weight loss has on mental health and the increased risk for eating disorders, body image concerns, and a whole bunch of other, mental health issues. And for me, I was really lucky in that I got exposure to weight inclusive messaging fairly early on in my career. Now, when I say early on in my career, I went through all of, graduate school, got my doctorate, had never heard of weight inclusive approaches to health, had never even, the idea that there was something else out there never occurred to me. Right. I graduated many years ago. So the conversation was very different then. I think that we're really lucky that weight inclusivity, intuitive eating, health and exercise, like these are concepts that have entered more of the mainstream dialogue in some way. It's not perfect. It's not where I'd like things to be, but there's an awareness that I think wasn't there 15 years ago. And, so for me, I was, attended a mindful eating workshop that was not weight inclusive. It was very much focused on, still using mindful eating to lose weight, to cut calories. But there were some other practitioners at the workshop who were very immersed in the health at every size movement. And they pushed back at the workshop, and it exposed me to that message that I really had never heard of before. And it just rattled around in my head. I remember someone saying to me but diets don't work. And I was kind of like, what are you talking about? Of course diets work. And then I was like, they're like, well, does it work for you? I was like, no, but that's just because there's something wrong with me, right? It works for everyone else.
I'm the exception.
Right, exactly. I'm the exception. They work for everyone else, but I just, I'm bad. So I just can't figure out how to do it right. And that was really what I had believed. And I was working in quote unquote obesity research at the time. And it actually was a really interesting experience because so much of the research aligned with the weight inclusive approach in terms of people really don't understand how to, have people lose significant amounts of weight and keep it off long term. And in the obesity research field, it was just constantly well, we need to design better interventions. We need to change this. We need to change that. But that goal was never questioned. And then I was kind of starting to learn in the weight inclusive perspective, maybe that goal shouldn't be the goal at all. And it just made so much more sense to me. So that was about a year into getting out clinically into having my practice. And it really changed things for me personally to get me out of the diet cycle and change the way that I was working with clients.
So I would love to kind of hone in on that a little bit more. And talk, kind of if you could highlight, the traditional goal around obesity and the goal that maybe we need to be looking maybe shifting the perspective around what maybe we could be considering a new goal. And then thinking about if you could help our listeners understand and help us understand this idea of the benefit of that shift.
Yeah, well, I think that the whole idea of obesity, and that's a controversial term in the weight inclusive space because
I was going to say we can mark it out beep.
Yeah. But I think that, using the term actually is a great example, even just starting with the language we're using around weight, because the term obesity really, is saying that you are sick because you're in a bigger body. So it is defining, an illness based on your BMI and your body mass index. And it's, there's so much research to show that that's not actually true, that there are people who are healthy and unhealthy across the weight spectrum. And that's what, weight inclusivity, I think, recognizes that more and says, you're not necessarily healthy just because you're in a smaller body, and you're not necessarily unhealthy because you're in a bigger body, but let's just focus on what are the things that actually, promote health. Let's work to increase access to health promoting behaviors for all people, including competent medical care, because there's so much weight stigma in the medical system that makes it really hard for people in larger bodies to get decent medical care because they're just being prescribed weight loss instead of, actually addressing the things that are causing issues.
Yeah, because when I even hear the word obesity, I'm like, what does that even mean? Yeah, it literally just means you're a certain BMI. And we all know BMI is just based on trash and not real research that's relevant today. So I don't
right off the bat, the old goal of
thinking about even the language, it's the step one. Why are we even classifying people based on their weight and height? Where's the benefit? It only serves to create a category for disease, like you said, which serves, some of the medical field in, prescribing medication or opting, into interventions because you now have a disease. And if you don't have a disease, preventative care is not like big in our country. So it goes back to money. Doesn't help anybody. It's just a category that creates a pretend diagnosis that now there can be reimbursement for treatment modalities.
And I'll add that the category is very problematic because there's so much entanglement with other variables that impact health. So when we look at a lot of these studies, it's very hard to disentangle BMI, for example, with socioeconomic status. It's very difficult to disentangle it with forms of discrimination, which creates chronic stress in people's bodies, which really, creates inflammation and a whole bunch of, health issues. A lot of the studies don't even separate out BMI from fitness or nutrition. So it's very difficult in those studies to really understand what is going on. And BMI often becomes kind of this catch-all for a lot of other variables that, occur like in the same way with BMI.
And I think it's just, it's a battle in terms of like shifting an entire culture's perspective, because it's so ingrained in people to automatically make assumptions around the size of somebody's body and their health. Mm-hmm. And it's like we've always talked about, like we narrow down health to the way somebody looks, diet, and exercise, and that's it.
Right.
And then we put that back on the person like it's their fault. And what I hear you saying is that, like, and what we've talked about a lot on this podcast is like, stop doing that. Like, let's look at the whole wheel of wellness. Yeah, and there are actual things that impact people's health that we have control over, mm-hmm. that are really meaningful. And stop putting energy and attention over here. Put it over there. Yep.
Yeah. And I would say also, not to mention that so much of our health is not under our control. I think that in our culture, we really have this myth of personal responsibility around our health. Whereas if you look at kind of that pie chart of what actually determines our health, for example, like socioeconomic status is one of the biggest impacts of health, as well as our genetics. So those are two things that people don't have a tremendous amount of control over. And yet we tend to blame ourselves, if we get sick or develop diabetes or have a medical condition. So I think that's another.
There's so much stigma around it. And I'm thinking of an example. I don't want to out any of my friends, but I have a friend of a friend who has a niece, and the niece's parents are very tall, big people. They're just tall, like super tall, like 6 feet plus, just larger, structured people. And this girl is about 10, and she's already 5'7", and I don't know how much she weighs, but it's a bigger number. Now, she has no medical conditions to my knowledge, and no issues, like nothing coming up in her life that's problematic. But her yearly checkup, the doctor made a comment about her weight being very high for her age. They're not even considering that she's freaking tall as crap. You know what I mean? But it's like for her age. And so adjusting, and I don't know how many questions the doctor asked about what she was eating, but suggesting to the parents, like, you need to adjust what she's eating and what she's eating and how much exercise and movement she's getting. And then that turning into a family meeting with extended family members. And I know these people, so I know their thought process. We want to take good care of this girl. We love her. But I'm thinking all the psychological damage of going to the doctor, being made to feel bad because your body is what your body is. You don't make any decisions about cooking, about groceries, you're just a child living in a home with people. And now the family, uncles and aunts and parents and grandparents are sitting at a table to say, listen, we got to do better. No more Chick-fil-A. Let's make sure we cut back on this. And you're just like, to me, that does much more damage than just letting this child exist in her larger body. right? Because I'm like, I want to advocate for her, but I'm like, not my family, not my, but it's so infuriating to see. And it's happening to children younger and younger. And the parents, again, we talked about this in the last episode, just want to do what's right. And they're just like, okay, well, what, I guess the diet it is, you know? And I just hate it. I hate to see that happen to our kids.
What I will say is that I hear that story a lot in my office with adults about how they started to learn that there was something wrong with their body, how they started to mistrust their body and stop listening to their natural, hunger, fullness cues. And just, when for many kids, eating is naturally intuitive. It's not something that they think about. And sometimes it is moments like that start to think, oh, I shouldn't be eating that because that's going to make my body bigger and that's bad. And I hear those stories quite often, originating in pediatricians' offices from adults who struggle for many, many years with eating disorders.
So I think that a lot of the issues, especially that come in the media, it is just around what we have control over and what we don't have control over. And then the misbelief that we have control over, because it's like, how do we navigate this with balance? So like, for instance, like if I said people who smoke are at an increased risk for cancer, would we all agree on that? Mm-hmm. And so then it's like, how do I know that's even true? Because then another article will be written by a doctor that says if you eat this much sugar, then you're at risk for cancer. It's like, how do we dissect the information? It's so complicated because it's all a false sense of control when somebody comes out and says that, right?
Yeah, I think it's very complicated, and it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of what can we believe and what's not true. And, there is science out there. Like, I certainly am not saying to mistrust all of medicine and all of science, but I think we also can be critical consumers of that information and understand, who's funding these studies. I think that's a really important thing to look at. Do the authors have other incentives to promote certain results? And, just trying to go to the actual study. I know not everyone has the privilege to be able to understand, kind of like medical research. You have to have a certain kind of education to be able to really decipher that. Time and even access to the articles, frankly, is not always so easy to get. But I'm always amazed sometimes, when an article comes out that gets a lot of traction in the press. And sometimes I go to read the actual article and I'm like, that's not what they're saying at all.
Yeah. I would argue that a lot of the articles that get press in the media are really just for clickbait. And I found they are often misinterpreting the results, and using a very clickbaity title, like science is found. And it's like, wait, what?
Recent ones that I'm thinking about are like the whole issue with the tampons.
Yeah.
And the microplastics. And it's like I just don't know how to filter anything. Because if there is something that's happening that's harmful, I don't want to use it. But I'm like, oh man, I don't got 3 hours to go down the rabbit hole of microplastics. And then should I just enjoy my life and not worry about that right now? Because I just don't have capacity to just stop my child from buying that plastic water bottle. It's like the lines are hard to find.
They are. Yeah. And I think that's why it's important to have trusted, experts that you do feel you can rely on, because also, the other thing is so many people are getting their medical information from social media, and oftentimes from people who don't have any, degree or expertise in these areas. So, just be mindful.
Mainstream doctors that I won't name who go on television and who say things under their medical degree and use that as leverage to, and then, that's really hard.
I think it goes back to what she's saying about financial gain.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our society is powered by money. And when there's an opportunity for financial gain, you can't always trust what you're hearing. So I think there's a few, they are on Instagram, but there are a few very trusted medical practitioners who I know dig into the research, who do their own research and, part of large research studies, that I feel like, okay, they read that article in detail. I can probably trust what they're saying about it. Because you're right. It could just be confusing and you could be going down rabbit holes all day long and not feel like you know anything anymore.
I mean, at this point, I'll be honest, kind of what I do now is I say, okay, you heard that. Because my old, I wouldn't say I had an eating disorder, but I had disordered eating, and sometimes it tries to creep in for sure. And it was all around like toxic things. I was like so worried about toxins and like, I think that's like orthorexia.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay. I didn't have like the full blown part of that, but I definitely had disordered eating. And so for me, when I hear it now, I do this, and I don't know if this is the right thing, but I go, okay, you can go down the path, but at what cost to your mental health? Even if it's true, even if microplastics are going to kill you, what cost will you have to your mental health to go down this rabbit hole, make the lifestyle adjustment, and be afraid? And then I often go, moving on, because I'm like, hell no, I'm not going to give up my serenity and peace for that.
Yeah, I think that in our culture, we have a real tendency to get very kind of micro focused on these little things. And it's because of the media that's very sensationalist, like, microplastics are causing this huge problem. But, the reality is I tend to think that all of that information can be very overwhelming and also tends to contradict each other. You can find 3 articles that say this and 3 articles that say the exact opposite. But when we can really like tune into our bodies, I think that our bodies are pretty wise. And usually, like, if we're eating in a way that's feeling good in our bodies, to me, that's a good indication things are, not in dire crisis.
Yeah. I agree with that.
And of course, work with a medical professional and, get that blood work done and the updates. But we can really, and I think that's a great point that you bring in. It's like we can spend a lot of our time and energy obsessing over, like the perceived toxins in certain foods or what foods are healthiest or whatnot. But the mental toll that takes has an impact on our health as well. And we know that stress is one of the biggest, has one of the biggest impacts in our health. So if we are stressing ourselves out, maybe even becoming, isolated because we don't want to go out to dinner with our friends because we're scared of, eating like a non-organic piece of food or whatever comes up, like all of that is also having an impact on our health. I would say arguably, bigger than food additives or something like that most people are eating, pretty much in not massive amounts anyways.
Yeah. And I
agree
think
with that.
Thinking about that experiment of what if I only focused on my mental health and not obsessed about my physical health, like even like, you know what I mean? Like what if I only focused on that? Like the physical body will gain the benefits of that for sure, because I definitely do not eat how I used to eat at all. But my mental health has really been more of a priority. And I do feel a lot better in my body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Digestion, like everything, which is the irony of it all, right?
Yep. I think that's the byproduct of tuning in, listening to yourself and not going down all these rabbit holes all day long. So I wanted to go back. You talked about, I thought this was so interesting because when I transitioned to an anti-diet lifestyle and, weight inclusive care and all these things, I remember learning about intuitive eating and learning about joyful movement. And then all of a sudden I started like noticing there were other diets and programs coming up using some of that same language, co-opting it and basically repackaging some diet, some lifestyle modification for weight loss. And I just remember being like, this is so confusing for people, especially like the newbies coming out of diet culture. And so you talk a lot about mindful eating, and you mentioned, being at a workshop that was on mindful eating. And I know that there is a lane of mindful eating that is not diet-based or restrictive-based. And then, of course, there's intuitive eating. I know they have some similarities and a few differences, but what is it like? And maybe can you highlight like what mindful and or intuitive eating really are and what they look like? And then what does it look like when those things are co-opted and used incorrectly, basically for some sort of diet? How can people even spot that and know that it's happening? Because they can be pretty sneaky, I would say.
Yeah. So I'll start off just talking about mindful eating and intuitive eating. I will make a little plug. I have a free video that you can get on my website about the differences in mindful eating and intuitive eating, because it's such a commonly asked question. But, essentially there's a lot of overlap with the two. They're both kind of anti-diet approaches. They're both non-restrictive approaches to food that emphasize kind of listening to your body, and, honoring what our body needs. To me, the biggest differences are that mindful eating is based on mindfulness meditation. So it really has that strong mindfulness component. Mindfulness meditation, for people who aren't familiar, is really the practice of being fully aware and present in the current moment. So we use the foundation of meditation, and I do encourage my clients to meditate. And it doesn't have to be a long, you don't have to be meditating for hours each day. I truly believe that even just a few minutes of my mindfulness meditation practice, I start people with 3 minutes a day, can start to shift the pathways in our brain and make it easier for us to be more present, especially in moments that we need it, which is, in the work that I do around mindful eating, which is bringing that awareness to our relationship with food and our body. So not just being present when we're eating, which is part of mindful eating, using your senses to really take in everything that we can about the eating experience, but also, using that sense of presence to connect with our body in terms of recognizing our internal, hunger cues, fullness, how different foods react with our body, what foods we enjoy, how foods taste. So kind of factoring in all of that, as well as the, critical thoughts that often come up around food and our body as well, and trying to shift that to a more acceptance-based perspective and having a more compassionate relationship with ourselves. So, that's how I think of mindful eating. And intuitive eating, again, has a lot of similarities. It's really based on the 10 principles that are laid out in the intuitive eating book. So for anyone interested in learning more about intuitive eating, the intuitive eating website has a tremendous amount of information on there and really lays out the 10 principles as well. Of course, the book is highly recommended as well. And then, we're seeing diet culture co-opt it a ton, and we're seeing it being integrated, we're seeing it both being integrated into diet programs. I think we're seeing this more so with mindful eating than intuitive eating even. And then we're also seeing it, and this I see a lot with intuitive eating, being used to market diet programs. So one of the things that really got under my skin was when I noticed, some diet programs. I don't know if we're allowed to name names here, but
Go for it.
Yeah. So Noom, which was a few years ago doing a tremendous amount of advertising, was actually using keywords for people, searching Google for intuitive eating resources, to advertise their diet program. And it would say, intuitive eating, Noom does intuitive eating. And to me, that felt like the epitome of such a predatory program, because who's searching for intuitive eating? A lot of the times it's people searching for eating disorder recovery, people who are struggling with eating disorders, looking for recovery resources, and people who are universally looking to heal their relationship with food from diets like Noom. So it just felt it made me so angry to prey on someone's vulnerability, to say, and a lot of people in that space, and you may have, kind of gone through this process yourself in your recovery. When we're first starting to, shift our thinking around food, it's very hard to let go of that weight loss piece. And if a program says you can heal your relationship with food and you can still lose weight, of course people are going to really gravitate towards that. So that just really bugged me.
Even in our product at WeShape, I've really tried to be mindful, because our product is a personalized product where people can have extreme customization. So every movement can be customized, from even people who need to be in bed. But our head coach is in a very abled body and has a very particular body type that could trigger someone in eating disorder recovery. So even in that, I'm like, like I've talked with eating disorder therapists, and I'm like, only you know your client, so I don't really want you promoting our product if you feel that them looking at his body is going to trigger, because I don't. Do you see what I mean? It's like there has to be. It's such an abuse of power, and it's really devastating that people are searching like that on Google and then finding something that will just perpetuate what they're actually feeling like they want to heal in themselves, and it's really gross. And I'm glad you called it out, because if you're listening, don't do that.
No, and Noom was one of the big ones. I recall that as well, and I feel like the anti-diet community really came together to like put out more content, just calling them for what it is. So I'm actually glad you said the name, because I think it needed to be said, because they were being very predatory by using those terms, and that absolutely, did not help anybody get healthier or feel better. So I've noticed things have quieted down with them a bit, and that makes me happy.
We're coming for it. Just kidding. We're totally going to get a lawsuit or something. Whatever. But yeah, I think it's important to highlight that, because if the real goal is to actually help people in their body, then I don't know. I just think we have to put all of this stuff. I'm personally ready in WeShape and in our business to just turn everything on its head.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like even this morning, I was telling my co-founder, what if we did this when we buy our ads? At the end of the ad, we can say, it's, we just care that you spend your money on a company that cares about your health. So it's okay if you don't want our product. Here's 3 other companies that we approve of. You could check out theirs too.
All the marketing people are like,
that's not how you do marketing. He's like so open, but he's like kind of twitching. And I'm like, no, like, don't. I just want to make sure that they don't give their money to somebody like, you know what I mean? Like, here's the people we've checked out. They sit on, they have sit on great ethics, and they're really here for your health. If you don't choose us, it's fine. Choose them.
I love it.
I might do that. Why not? If that's the real goal, I'm going to do that. Okay. We'll talk about that later.
People first.
But that is the goal, right? Like I feel like if you're a true health company, it is about that, making sure that you're looking out for people's emotional and psychological safety.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And people are ready for it. People want this. People want to know that they do care about where they're buying things from now. So I appreciate you highlighting the fact that, we have to be, unfortunately, mindful and careful about where we buy things from, because regardless of the words that they say, it's important to know the people behind those products if you can.
Yeah, I agree completely. And when you talk about like the red flags, one of the biggest to me is, for people, mindful eating, I'll speak to mindful eating because that's really the work that I do, is true mindful eating is inherently a weight inclusive practice, because it's based on mindfulness, which embodies acceptance and compassion, and really kind of meeting ourselves where we are. And if we're saying our body is bad, our body needs to be changed, I can't trust my body, then we're not able to really foster that sense of mindfulness. It's like the antithesis of mindfulness, because it's not acceptance. It's about, trying to, punish yourself in many ways. It doesn't go hand in hand. So to me, when I see mindful eating programs, and mindful eating has gotten embedded in Weight Watchers and has gotten embedded in a lot of different diet programs. If you see a program that is using mindful eating for the purposes of weight loss, or that talks about you can eat mindfully or you can eat intuitively and you can still lose weight, or that's prescribing a certain way of eating, that's saying you can mindfully eat, but you can only eat, 5 almonds, or mindfully eat, half of a croissant or whatever, all of those things to me are big red flags that this is not, whether intentional or not, it's not a company that really understands what mindful eating is about.
Yeah. That's a good point. Just because the language can get so tricky, and it can be very confusing. So I think, the biggest red flag is if they're trying to tell you that your weight can be managed, changed, your body composition through some form of mindfulness. It's just a diet. It's just another diet, just so everyone is aware.
Yeah. And I think any time in the wellness space, if you're looking for, if someone is trying to sell you something that does not incorporate any of the emotional stuff and your own mental well-being, if mental health is not on their radar and they're only looking at certain physical things, goodbye. In my opinion, I'm like, I gotta know that the mental side is there.
I mean, I would argue if they're looking at any physical thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that for me, I mean, because I remember like a year ago when 75 Hard was like the thing to do. And it's like, it's so good for you. You have to read a book. And I'm like, so because they said do these extremely ridiculous long 2-a-day workouts and added a book to it.
That was another one of my marketing ideas. No, I'm not kidding. A couple months ago, I said, let's do 75 easy.
75.
Let's do that.
Sign me up for that.
75 minutes.
Yes,
I'm
seriously.
going to do this stuff, you guys. I'm not going to wait for permission anymore.
Just go for it.
I'm going to do it.
But yeah, you know, it's like just because they added a mental health component or something to it, it doesn't take away from what they're telling you to do. Over-exercise your body twice a day.
That's what you had to do it twice a day?
Yeah, the 75 Hard program consisted of 2 exercises a day. One needed to be outside, one inside, and a bunch of other stuff I can't remember, but it was just all about.
Nobody's still doing that. That doesn't last.
I know. Nobody does it after the 75 days are over. But,
I made it 75 seconds.
and then I was out. So.
Yeah, but I always think it's so interesting when I agree completely. Like, just because something has a mental component doesn't mean that it's not a diet. And we certainly see that a lot with the weight loss plans. But I also think it's so interesting when these programs like become kind of go viral and become so popular based on, you know, a research study that was like looking at, you know, rats in a laboratory or something. And you're completely, you know, like not factoring in human behavior. Like, great that the rats showed, you know, greater longevity when they were fed this incredibly restrictive diet. But like, we're humans. What happens when you know, deal with all the human stuff that comes along with that?
Yeah, I mean, we are not rats. Like, if
and like to be frank, if somebody said the way you used to live, Katie, would have bought you 10 more years on your life, and if you choose to live how you live now, you'll lose 10 years. I say, great, take the 10 years off. Mm-hmm. I'm not living that way. I'm
because
not.
It's like a prison. You're
not.
In a prison.
Great.
And so
even if it's true, great.
Give me my years happy.
I'd rather live a quote unquote shorter life or whatever, but have much higher quality. My relationships are better. I have more joy. I have more freedom. I have less obsessive thoughts. Like, I don't want that for an extra 10 years. Like, no way. Like, it's just, it's wild. It's so wild. But
yeah, but if we talk about health, oh, sorry, I shouldn't say if you talk about health.
No, I want to hear what you have to say. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you talk about health, those are all the things that have a real big impact on health. Joy, you know, feeling more relaxed, less stressed, social connections, relationships, like, those things are huge and so often don't get talked about in the health space.
Yep. And not things that we can measure in rats.
Mm-hmm. That part. We're not rodents. Well, I so appreciate this conversation with you today. You've highlighted so many important things, and this fundamental belief is a really important shift that I think a lot of people will be able to resonate with. So let people know where they can find you.
So you can find me on social media at The Anti-Diet Plan. I'm most active on Instagram. You can also, if you're in the New York area and interested in therapy, that's at ConasonPsychologicalServices.com. And you can find a free mindful eating starter guide on my website, drconason.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. Conason. It's been so wonderful connecting with you. We'll put everything in the show notes. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Lisa. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.